The lights went out in Vladivostok at exactly 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Then Novosibirsk. Then Yekaterinburg. By dawn, half of Russia was plunged into darkness, and millions of people were packing their cars, heading for any border that would still let them through. This isn't a Hollywood disaster movie. This is happening right now, and the world is watching a nuclear superpower tear itself apart from the inside. Welcome back to Mr. Warlog, where we expose the reality behind the headlines. What you're about to see will shock you because while state television broadcasts victory parades and nuclear threats, the Russian Federation is experiencing the most catastrophic internal collapse since 1991. Power grids are failing across 11 time zones. Border checkpoints are overwhelmed with desperate citizens trying to escape. And the government that once promised stability and strength is now begging its own people to stay. Today we reveal how a nation that spans a third of the world's landmass is crumbling under the weight of its own ambitions. This isn't just about economics or politics. This is about survival. And by the end of this investigation, you'll understand why millions of Russians believe their only choice is to run. Let me paint you a picture of what collapse looks like in the 21st century. It doesn't happen overnight like in the movies. It happens slowly, then suddenly, like water seeping through cracks until the dam finally bursts. And that's exactly what we're witnessing across the Russian Federation. The first crack appeared in the power grid. Russia's electrical infrastructure was built during the Soviet era, designed to serve a different economy for a different purpose. Today, that aging network is being pushed beyond its limits. The unified energy system of Russia, which connects power plants from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean, is experiencing what engineers call cascade failures. When one section goes down, the load shifts to neighboring grids, overloading them until they too collapse. But here's what makes this crisis unprecedented. These aren't random technical failures. These are systematic breakdowns caused by a perfect storm of neglect, brain drain, and resource misallocation. The technicians who once maintained these systems have either fled the country or been conscripted into military service. The spare parts needed for repairs are stuck behind international sanctions. And the government funds that should go to infrastructure maintenance are instead being poured into weapons production. The result is a domino effect that's spreading across the continent. When the lights went out in Vladivostok, it wasn't just inconvenience, it was the beginning of panic. Hospitals switched to backup generators. ATMs stopped working. Cell towers went dark. In a society that has become completely dependent on electrical power, losing the grid means losing everything. Within hours, the highways leading west from Vladivostok were clogged with traffic. Families who had never imagined leaving their homeland were suddenly loading everything they could carry into their cars. Social media exploded with videos of endless traffic jams, people sleeping in their vehicles, children crying in the back seats as their parents tried to explain why they had to leave everything behind. This mass exodus isn't limited to the Far East. Reports are coming in from across the Federation of similar scenes playing out in dozens of cities. The pattern is always the same. First, the power fails. Then the panic sets in. Then the roads fill with refugees from their own country. But where are these millions of people trying to go? That's where the story gets even more desperate. Russia shares borders with 16 different countries, but most of those borders are either closed or severely restricted. The European Union sealed its borders to Russian citizens months ago. China is allowing only limited crossings, and those who do get through face weeks of bureaucratic delays. Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and the Central Asian republics are overwhelmed and struggling to process the flood of asylum seekers. The human cost is staggering. Families are being separated as some members make it across borders while others are turned back. Children are growing up in refugee camps that were never designed for long-term habitation. Elderly people are dying in the cold as they wait in lines that stretch for kilometers. And here's the cruel irony. Many of these refugees are fleeing a country that their government claims is winning a glorious victory. State television shows parades and celebrations while ordinary citizens pack their belongings and head for the exits. The disconnect between propaganda and reality has never been more stark. The numbers tell the real story. Independent estimates suggest that more than 8 million Russians have left the country since the crisis began. That's roughly the entire population of Austria simply vanishing from the Russian Federation. The demographic impact is devastating. These aren't just random citizens. These are the educated, the skilled, the young. These are the people any country needs to build a future. The brain drain is accelerating the collapse. When your best doctors, engineers, teachers, and entrepreneurs flee the country, what's left behind? The answer is becoming clear as we watch entire regions struggle to maintain basic services. Hospitals are closing because there aren't enough qualified staff. Schools are shutting down because teachers have emigrated. Factories are stopping production because their skilled workers have disappeared. But the government's response to this crisis reveals everything you need to know about their priorities. Instead of addressing the root causes that are driving people to flee, they're building walls to keep people in. New laws make it nearly impossible for Russian citizens to leave the country legally. Exit taxes have been imposed that most families simply cannot afford. Border guards have been instructed to question anyone trying to leave about their reasons for travel. This is the behavior of a regime that knows it's losing legitimacy. When a government has to prevent its own citizens from leaving, that government has already lost the most important battle of all, the battle for the hearts and minds of its people. The collapse isn't just happening in dramatic moments like power failures and mass evacuations. It's happening quietly in thousands of small ways every single day. Rural villages are being abandoned as young people head for the cities or the borders. Essential services are being cut as local governments run out of money. Infrastructure that took decades to build is crumbling because there's no one left to maintain it. This is what systemic failure looks like in real time, and we're only seeing the beginning. The economic indicators paint an even bleaker picture than the mass migrations. While millions flee westward, the ruble continues its death spiral against every major currency. What was once worth 4 cents is now barely worth 2, and that decline is accelerating. But here's what the financial headlines miss. This isn't just currency devaluation. This is the systematic destruction of an entire economic ecosystem. Russian banks are running out of foreign reserves. International payment systems have been severed. The central bank is printing money so fast that inflation has become hyperinflation in all but name. A loaf of bread that cost 50 rubles last year now costs over 200. Gasoline prices have tripled. Medicine, when it's available at all, is priced beyond the reach of ordinary families. This economic collapse is driving a secondary wave of migration that's even more desperate than the first. These aren't the educated professionals who left early with savings and plans. These are working families who held on as long as they could, watching their life savings evaporate, their jobs disappear, their children go hungry. When a factory worker in Samara can no longer afford to feed his family, what choice does he have but to load them into his old car and drive toward any border that might let them through? The agricultural regions are hemorrhaging people at an unprecedented rate. Farmers are abandoning their fields not because they want to, but because they can no longer afford fuel for their tractors or seeds for planting. The government promised subsidies that never materialized. Banks foreclosed on properties whose owners fled. Entire agricultural districts that once fed the nation are returning to wilderness. This agricultural collapse is creating food shortages that make the power outages seem manageable by comparison. Grocery store shelves in major cities are increasingly bare. What food remains is priced beyond the reach of average citizens. The government talks about food security while importing grain from countries it once claimed to surpass. The irony would be laughable if it weren't causing so much human suffering. In the industrial heartland, the situation is equally catastrophic. Factories that once produced everything from automobiles to electronics are shutting down permanently, not because of sanctions alone, but because their entire workforce has vanished. Assembly lines designed for thousands of workers now operate with skeleton crews of hundreds. Quality control has become a memory. Production schedules are fantasies. The technology sector, what little remained after the initial exodus, is now completely gutted. Software companies that took decades to build have dissolved in months. Startup incubators are empty shells. The innovation economy that Putin once promised to build has simply evaporated, taking with it any hope of economic diversification. But perhaps the most telling sign of systemic collapse is what's happening to the military itself. Reports are filtering out of entire units, simply walking away from their posts. Not deserting in the traditional sense, but collectively deciding that their family's survival matters more than their service obligations. When soldiers choose emigration over duty, the state has lost its most fundamental source of power. The transportation networks that once connected this vast country are failing in spectacular fashion. Railways designed to move freight across continents now struggle to maintain basic passenger service. Airports in regional cities have closed indefinitely. The highway system, never robust to begin with, is deteriorating rapidly as maintenance crews join the migration flows. This transportation collapse creates a vicious cycle. As connectivity breaks down, isolated regions become even more desperate. People who might have stayed if they felt connected to the broader economy now see no choice but to leave. The country is literally fragmenting as its physical links dissolve. In the northern regions, entire cities built around resource extraction are becoming ghost towns. When the mining companies pull out and the workers follow, what remains are empty apartment blocks and rusting equipment. The permafrost is reclaiming industrial sites that represented decades of investment and development. The social fabric is unraveling just as dramatically as the economic infrastructure. Community organizations that held rural areas together for generations are collapsing as their leaders emigrate. Churches are losing their congregations. Schools are closing not just because teachers have left, but because there are no children left to teach. Cultural institutions that once defined Russian identity are shuttering across the Federation. Museums can't afford to maintain their collections. Theaters have no audiences. Libraries are being abandoned with their books still on the shelves. The cultural heritage that took centuries to build is being lost in mere months. Emergency services across vast regions have simply ceased to exist. Police stations in rural areas stand empty. Fire departments have no equipment or personnel. Ambulance services have been suspended indefinitely. Citizens are truly on their own in ways that would have been unthinkable just years ago. The psychological impact of this comprehensive breakdown cannot be overstated. Millions of people who built their entire identities around being Russian citizens are now questioning everything they believed about their country, their government, and their future. This is what the end of an empire looks like, not with nuclear explosions or foreign invasions, but with millions of ordinary people simply walking away from the system that failed them. The Russian Federation is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, and no amount of propaganda can hide the exodus of 8 million souls fleeing toward uncertain futures. What do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for Putin's Russia, or can a nation this broken ever rebuild itself? Share your thoughts below. If you want to see the real stories behind the headlines that mainstream media won't tell you, subscribe to Mr. Warlog. I'm Charlie from the Mr. Warlog team. Stay informed, stay free.